name's Anthony Pahnke. I'm the Vice President of Family Farm Defenders, and we want to invite you to our first Family Farm Defenders podcast. And we have some pretty well-known farmer activists here. Ben Burkett, who's based in Petal, Mississippi, vegetable and soy farmer, active in the Indian Springer Farm Cooperative, active in the farm crisis in the 1980s. Mr. Burkett's also a former state coordinator of Mississippi Association of Co-ops, a member of the Federation of Southern Cooperatives. This was present in 17 different states, and also former president of the National Family Farm Coalition. So I think we've seen Ben at a lot of protests, a lot of actions over the years. And also with us is Denise O'Brien. With her husband, they've farmed organic 50 years, also a vegetable farmer. They used to milk cows in Southwest Iowa, and also has participated in farm crisis protests back in the 80s. Also protests against the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs in the early 90s. It was at Seattle in 1999 to protest the WTO, and helped start a bunch of organizations, Prairie Fire Rural Action, Farm Unity Coalition, then later the Women, Food, and Agricultural Network, most recently the Nishabat Water Defenders. And before we get into it, this is as our first Family Farm Defenders podcast. We're here to kind of explore, discuss how to build a just food and farm system, and having these conversations with people from the front lines of the struggle. We're motivated by issues in agriculture that we think are not necessarily, that they're not getting the attention that they deserve in other media outlets and so on. And so we're going to discuss more issues as we have other podcasts. We'll talk about the environment, we'll talk about immigration, we'll talk about pricing, we'll talk about trade. And so this podcast is the first in what we hope is a long series of other podcasts. And so begin with Mr. Burkett from Mississippi, Denise from Iowa. So welcome, thanks for joining us. Get started with a general question here about if you could describe maybe how you got involved with protests and with which organizations. I don't know if Denise, you want to go first?
Sure. I was thinking at the very beginning. I mean, we started farming in 1975. So, and we met people and around mostly Democratic politics. Iowa was a central place for caucuses and things. So we got to firsthand experience. And so we met people through food buying clubs and through the Democratic Party, and formed an organization called Progressive Prairie Alliance. And it was a group of us farmers in Southwest Iowa. So, and we were being tutored, I guess. I don't know if tutored is the right word, but anyway, we were learning about farm history then, and about Henry Wallace, and about some of the New Deal, and all of the things that we learned about parity. We learned about all these things. And as we got into the 80s, then it was very apparent with the situation that there was a farm crisis emerging. And so as a small group, we started, making people aware of that. And it emerged into farming, founding the Iowa Farm Unity Coalition and Prairie Fire Rural Action. And then about the early 80s, when people started realizing that something was happening and it was okay to say out loud that something was happening, is sort of like what's happened in the last few months right now in the United States. As soon as people start saying, hey, this isn't right, then other people start saying it's not right. And so what emerged from that is, and people were actually going through some very, very critically hard times with suicide and bank foreclosures and all of this. And so as that emerged, the protests emerged, and some of them started in very small, simple ways, like holding white crosses on courthouse lawns, as John Mellencamp's song is about, and having penny auctions at farm sales. Mm-hmm. So those were the first kind of protests, and then it went into the streets after that.
Wow, there's a lot to unpack there. Mr. Burkett, what do your origins in this story? Farmer protests.
Yeah, as Denise stated, we was farming. I started farming in '74 on my own, and it did good the first 7 or 8 years. Then the crash around '85, interest rate tears brought about a real tough situation. The interest rate was 18%, I believe, on money, and then tariff against, I believe, in the soybean embargo and the prices. So the crisis would begin, and I was born from FSA, which is FSA now, and they had the loan restructuring and debt relief, and I did my application for myself. And other farmers found out I could do it pretty good, so I went to doing it for other farmers. But at the time, I didn't know anything about the Federation of Southern Cooperatives. And then, well, the co-op organized, the co-op became a member of the Federation in '81. So as time went along and progress, we got more involved in the farm crisis because it really impacted uh, a number of farmers, and it put a lot of farmers out of business. It really did. They couldn't survive. So we were at the Federation. We were interested in the black farmer, and we allied with other organizations, and that's how we got involved in a national movement. And I know when the Dave Seneca, what the organization that bought all the tractors to Washington D.C.
Oh, American Ag.
All right, man.
Yeah.
Yep.
Wrapped up enough money to send one from Mississippi. Cause you had to take up there on the trail and all of that. And that was a pivotal moment in agriculture. So we thought from there we could move on, bring about a change. But we did get some legislation that brought a little relief to farmers. Conservation work program where you could put your farm in wildlife or pine tree, then the payment would help you save your farm. And from there, we went on to the Pigford lawsuit and other things but it all could not happen had not we been working together.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I first met Mr. John Kinsman in a church in Chicago. And this had to be in the early '80s, Family Farm Defenders. And from there, my longtime friend, all of his life, and I learned how to, how you said, effective protest. I remember we were marching around the Chicago Board of Trade in the costume. Her in their Holstein costume and many other protesters. But Denise stated, I think in the last 3 or 4 months, we have reverted back to even a worse crisis in agriculture. So we can't give up. And our vision of agriculture in this country was not 100,000 large farm, but 1 million small farm farming in a local economy where everything was done local. We had our own local process and our own energy. Everything could be local, and with a fair price. I don't want you to use the word parity. I don't know what to say. All we asking for is a fair price for a fair product. So the journey continues. And we take the torch to another generation like my daughter. And I think in the Federation of Southern Cooperatives, no, the first generation that started, none of those active in the run of the Federation now. It's all second and third generation, which is good. We are here to support them now.
I'm wondering, about your experiences, maybe both of your past experiences from like the 80s. You mentioned some different actions. I wonder if there's like particular protests or actions that stand out from that time period. Like you mentioned, Denise, the white crosses and so on. And I know, Ben, I've heard you speak about trailering up the tractors and some of the difficulties with that. I wonder if you would kind of dig down in a couple of those stories, people to hear.
Yeah, like I said, the one was very interesting to me which I went several times in Chicago around the Board of Trade. I mean, the Chicago Board of Trade protesting the price of cheese and milk. Well, it was one about 8 or 9 of us dressed up in the cow suit.
The cow suits.
Must have been 300 police.
Yep.
I remember that better. And also I remember doing one in I want to say in San Diego against the free trade agreement with the farm workers, and we were beating on pots with a spoon. And it was thousands of people in that. I'd never been in one where everybody beating on a tin pot with a spoon. I remember that one real good. And even coming on back down local, the caravan to DC in 1992 with black farmers started off. And we marched around the Capitol State House in Texas, and it came on to Louisiana, Mississippi. Every state we went to, we stopped at the State House. So by the time we got to Washington D.C., we had a real caravan, and that the farmers and people that went had to pay their own way.
Yeah.
But we made it all the way to Washington D.C. Then they bought a pig somewhere, and we took the pig to USDA.
Yep.
Protesting. But that was real. Those three. And then after that, I realized that we were marching and singing in the 60s in the civil rights. That really don't work these days. That kind of protest. I don't think so.
Yeah.
That worked at that time. But now with the Facebook and the internet and TikTok and everything can move so fast. So the way we protested then, I really don't see it being effective now, but it's still a place for that kind of protest thing. But them four I vividly remember.
And then, Denise, what do you think? Do you have, about effectiveness, but also, some a story from the 80s, perhaps?
Oh my God! With Ben bringing all that up, oh my gosh! The one I was thinking about with Ben was when we got the pig, and I think that was the Pigford. We walked from the Capitol down to the USDA with the pig, and the pig shit on the steps of the USDA. So that was a good one, and I mean, Ben, when you're talking about that, it's just like from the farm crisis, where we had huge numbers at this big auditorium at Iowa State, and we had Bishop Dingman was there, and it was full. Hilton Coliseum, where we play basketball now, we always have, they always have, but was full, and busloads of people came, and those were, and then we transitioned. It's my belief, this is my opinion from my years of this, is that when Reagan infused money into the farm crisis, when they realized that things were doing something, and I can't remember what exactly those were, I'd have to research that, but people started thinking, well, we'll be all right, and it kind of faded out in the late 80s. Well, and then but it really didn't fade out, and that was the time when we got vertical integration for the pigs. People had already had vertical integration for chickens and poultry in the South, and now it was coming to Iowa, and then we had the trade agreements, and going to France for the last, GATT one was incredible, because that was incredible because of all the people from all over the world, and protesting in Europe was more accepted than it is here. It was one of those things where it was a big festivity, and sure, after a while, when people got out of hand, there was tear gas and things, but it was nothing like what we have here. And then Seattle, that was, the anarchists kind of got out of hand there, and things, but again, when I look over all those things, it seems like nothing lasted for a very long time. As Ben was saying, things are a little bit different. Then I still think protest has a place, and as people are building up, we did a protest on Hands Off a couple weeks ago in Red Oak, Iowa, which is our Senator Joni Ernst's hometown. And we had 150 people there. And this is very red rural. So that for people to stand along the highway and yell and shout and have signs, and that is pretty amazing. And that, that I think it's got its place. It makes people feel like they're doing something. And yesterday I saw a video of farmers in Maine did a tractorcade. And of course they've got a governor in that's standing up to this administration and not not acquiescing. But it was a really fun little video to see the farm tractors that were at the Capitol in Maine. And someone said, "Oh, I wish this would happen to Iowa," but Iowa's been bought out, and the kind of tractors that were there in Maine were the kind of tractors that we drive, that are 40 and 30 and 40 years old and still usable. We could still fix them, but I think the farmers, and it's hard for me to call them farmers because they're tractor drivers. Everything they do is they're mining the soil, and they're in a predicament. They're victims of a system. It's not that they can't get out of, and they're not brave enough to get out of. And that's what our neighbors are around here.
Mm-hmm. I'm wondering about, you mentioned the international protests. So you had been to France. I don't know, Ben, you've been around. I wonder how have what the differences between protests in the United States and other countries, and also what's the place for those international protests?
Yes, I've been to several of them in Africa, Asia, France. To me, in Europe, it seemed to be more of a support for family farmers there. Mm-hmm. What a month or so ago, I had 3 farmers from Italy over here. They came for a week with us on agro tourism on the farm, and I've been to Italy 2 or 3 years ago with them for something like the Federation annual meeting. It appeared to me in most European countries that the government and the European Union and other is more sympathetic to family farming than here in America. And Denise stated where I'm at is about 3 huge farmers basically farming the whole county. They lease everybody land. They got 3,000 or 4,000 acres and all these big tractors. But every time I talk with them, they say they ain't making no money.
Right.
I can't understand if they ain't making no money. I don't know how in the world they feel the rest of us can make some money. And the only way they can stay in business every year, they got to add more acres or increase yield to keep up with the cost of production. So to me, that's a proven fact that system don't work.
Yeah.
Get what was it? Get bigger or get out. Get big enough. There's no end to that. To that use of chemical and the use of more land, more inputs, and Roundup Ready soybean, cotton, and where I'm at, them red root pigweed can mutate with the chemical. Every year you got to increase it a little bit stronger and stronger to control it. Dicannone and all the other chemicals they use on a temporary use permit. But I would say, even in Africa, we in when I say we, the Federation, the chicken farmers in Senegal is organizing a cooperative. Now they're up to 1,500 members. You know what? They don't have big chicken house like we. They still like almost like free range, and their biggest problem is feed cost. So they've been organizing a couple of years. The government seem to be supporting what they're doing. They help them, grow chickens more better. So that's the biggest difference I see that in European country and European Union. I've been in a protest marching in front of European headquarters in Brussels with the farmers there. And then they invite us inside to listen to the complaints of the farmer. But here, USDA is on one track one time. Then when another president come in, they be on another track. Both the Democrats and Republicans, they do a lot of what they're doing to help family farmers and small farmers, farmer of color, Native American. But I have seen over the years, very little of it gets down to the farmer that really need it. So we have to still advocate for those programs. Better loans, access to loans, the environment. Everybody knows global warming. I know that since by farming, I can tell 30 years ago, I could farm without irrigation. Now I can't hardly grow anything without irrigation because the cycle is off. But I got agree with my good friend Denise. I agree with it. It's still room for actual protest, marching and singing with the band. But I'm not so much into the internet, but I can see the effects of it.
Okay, so Denise, I don't know, but you and you mentioned France, Europe. I'm curious what other experiences you've had in other countries.
Not as much as Ben has. Ben's been really representative in a lot of ways. I was thinking, the one I was thinking of was, and I can't remember it, it was in Miami, and it was the Central American Free Trade Agreement and NAFTA. There were, a number of things that we did in the NAFTA. What was interesting around organizing around the trade agreements is that there were progressive people in both in all three countries, the United States, Canada, and Mexico, and we would come together for meetings. And I, as the president of the National Family Farm Coalition, would be present at those meetings and talking about what we wanted in those documents. And that similar to the it seemed to me that, and we have Rome. I was in one in Rome. What we did as our international work with the National Family Farm Coalition was sort of follow where the United Nations was having major meetings, and Rome, of course, was the Food and Agriculture Organization. So that was a place where we could gather, and that was where we came out of Via Campesina and meeting with people from from Canada and Mexico, and then we were invited into the La Via Campesina family, and those meetings would be and protests would be held around United Nations, a lot of United Nations type of work, even though our country really, even with the Democrats and Republicans, didn't give a lot of credence with the United Nations. We still met in those places, because other countries, it really made a lot of difference for them in approaching their governments. And during the decade of the 90s were also the United Nations decade of conferences, of happenings. And that was the Earth Summit in Rio, the Women's Summit in the Women's Conference in Um, that was actually just made me
Yeah.
think of the protest in China in Beijing. We were going around and we were led by the women from India, and Vandana Shiva was there, and we all had just finished a workshop and walked out, and we could only do protests within this compound. We couldn't go outside on the streets of where we were limited in Beijing, but the women were moving through, and they were moved up to, it was McDonald's had a concession there at the conference, and we marched over to the McDonald's concession, and there was the plastic Ronald McDonald sitting there, and the women picked him up and they started shoving a bun down his behind and said, McDonald's is no NGO, McDonald's is no NGO. So oh my gosh, we could talk about these things forever, and it's, and they're really good sources of energy, but we really have to have that change that really hasn't happened yet. I mean, this is the industrial agribusiness has the money. They've been working in our state to shield them from with the pesticide gag act, which is still live in the Iowa legislature, and they've convinced people that the labeling, it's about labeling, it's not anything else. It's the EPA said on the label it doesn't cause cancer, so that's all they look at. So it's really, really hard, but we have to keep going, as Ben said. It's just, there's days that I think, oh, can we do this? Can we keep doing this? But we have to. And we're on a call last night with the Iowa Farmers Union, and they're working really hard in Iowa at the legislature and that. And it's like, we have to have power to the people. It's got to be that.
I wonder about like the mood or these, like when you've been in the protests in the past, what people have felt like, or what's like the vibe, how people are feeling in these moments. You mentioned the energy, but could you talk a bit about how you think people have felt maybe back in the 80s and through now? What are feelings people have?
Well, I said back in the 80s, it was as compared to now, it was a freedom to say and do almost anything you want to say against the government. Local fellows. I see now in the last 3 or 4 months, most people are afraid to stand up and criticize what's going on at USDA or what's going on here in the state of Mississippi, on a local level. I think most consumers and the few farmers that's left is either not content, but just feel like it's no way out. This like it said, just give up. They said, well, just accept it and go on. I don't think that's the right approach. But the 70s and the 90s, I doubt we would dare take a pig to USDA
today. Oh my gosh, no, we wouldn't. And yeah, I think the same. It's like there's more fear than there was. We came out of in the 80s, we came out of the Vietnam, protests, and things did change. The war did stop. There was an optimism about that we could change things. There was hope. And that's what brought people together. What I see now, the difference I see now is that we're fighting. I'm an optimistic person, so I do have hope, but we're fighting. We're reacting to what's happening. We're not moving forward with change that I see. And that's kind of the difference I see, is that so many things are coming down on us so quickly. And, and we're still like trying to wrap our heads around what's happening. And that it's just like, you know what, it's confusing, and it seems to me that that is the strategy. They've got, you know, Project 2025. They want to implement that, and so they're doing what they can against any rule of law that we have, and so it's a much different situation than it was then, for sure.
Do you think the goals have changed? You mentioned like a lot of the stuff apparently, you know, pricing and the industrial system, but have the goals, I mean, since when you started protesting, have the goals shifted a whole lot? What do you think in terms of your targets or goals?
I don't think so. I mean, Ben said that a little bit earlier. You know, we want a family farm system of agriculture in the United States. We want fair prices. There's ways to do that, and we've tried. You know, we're trying really hard to make those changes, and we have been, and we make. Ben stated it well earlier. You know, we make little tiny progress, and then the next administration comes around and pulls the rug out from underneath us like it has now, not as critically as it is now, it seems. And I was always frustrated throughout the years of the incremental changes. I wanted big change, and a little conservation here and a little local foods there, you know, wasn't doing enough. Now the last administration with Bill Sack, and you know, with the top funding for transition to organic farming and things like that, that was putting substantial money into things, as Ben mentioned, processing, transitioning, you know, all of this thing. And yeah, you know, Rollins has stated those were non-essential programs. And you know, we're in a time that it's, you know, we have to continue to fight for this because of climate change and because of our local economies. It's very important.
And I like to note that the COVID pandemic showed the vulnerability of that system. We didn't have but 2 or 3 meat packers in the whole country, and they were shut down. It really showed the states should have seen that system can have people hungry in 3 or 4 days.
Right.
So right after that, they put a little money in it and built 1 or 2 local processing plants here in Mississippi with some of that COVID relief money, and the food box program. We were fortunate enough in the spring co-op. We had one of those contracts where we did, I think, around 11,000 boxes in a 16-week period, where we delivered to nonprofits here in South Mississippi. To me, that's sort of the example that the system would work local if we had just a little bit more support. Because the COVID epidemic really showed the vulnerability of 3 or 4 companies controlling all the food in this country. But now it's over with, it's forgot about. So we're moving back to the same system, like what is it? 3 or 4 companies control most of the pork process in the whole country. 3 or 4 beef, JB out of Brazil, most of the beef. And so that integrated system, it really, really showed that wasn't the way to go. But somehow or another, we thought about it for a little while, but now they don't think about it.
I'm wondering about like alliances in the history of protests. Who have you worked with? Other farm groups, non-farm groups? Who have you connected with in the past?
You know, go ahead, Ben.
It's been so many of them over the years, from the churches to the other groups in California and Iowa and everywhere, or consumer groups sometime. I know when the farm workers market, you know, and they won 1 cent more. I protest with them around Taco Bell, and Chipotle. You had consumer-based groups coming in with the farm workers. You had farmers coming with the farm workers. I know the Catholic Church have always been a main player, and so you had religion, you had farm workers, community-based organization, many of them that we work with, and I said some of the private foundation would put up a little money as we went along, you know, to support the work that was being carried out through National Family Farm and Rural Coalition and Family Farm and many other organizations. I think if we hadn't had that support, the United Methodists, the religious part became. I remember what was it name? David Ostendorf.
Ostendorf, yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
that big old CMA Black Methodist Church in L.A. where all the movie stars and they let him preach, and it was for anything to really be effective, you got to have that coalition.
Absolutely. I think, the alliances, and I see, the farm crisis was the farm crisis. The crisis we're in now is multiple, sectors. And you see, and some, that we had very strong union, church, not so much the consumer. The consumer has been the one that we really, and that those are developing. And, it was interesting during the 80s, we didn't have the environmental groups with us. And we kept trying to convince the environmental groups that industrial farming was our environmental problem, that ag was. And, finally, they've come around to seeing that that's what it is, the Sierra Club and the Environmental Working Group, and that the payments that farmers get are disincentives to do anything that's good to our land. And so and we need now, I believe in this time, especially with our fight against agribusiness with the chemicals. Iowa has the second highest rate of cancer in the country, next to Kentucky. And so we need that alliance with regular eaters, that care about, the water. It's because of the water, because of the soil, and because of the helicopters spraying everything around us. So that coalescing hasn't quite happened yet where it needs to be here in Iowa, I think.
I was curious, you mentioned this, you mentioned the fear. I was thinking of like differences between what you've seen change over time. But what about repression? Like, have you, in your protest, ever people get arrested, and what's happened? I don't know, or maybe there hasn't been either repression or people losing funding or stuff like that. Have you experienced any of those things in your years of advocacy?
Not until now.
That's what I want to say. Not directly, but being arrested. Yes, several been arrested.
Yeah,
protesting. I know. We were protesting around the U.S. Army depot in Alabama, and some was willing to be arrested. I wasn't willing to be arrested. I had to go at the farm.
right.
Yes, you can be arrested, and I know several times in Alabama with John Zippert and Ralph Page and all them being. But to be, we were trying to unionize the chicken processing plants in Mississippi one time, and we got arrested, And Denise stated about the union support sometimes been very supportive. I know in what was it when the farmers had the drought?
Oh,
We sent hay out to
mhm,
somewhere, but the Teamsters truck hauled it. For,
yeah,
The
at the
Oklahoma?
same time when we had to drive
yeah,
down, he bought us, no, the hurricanes and things.
yeah.
Katrina, they bought us the
Mm.
tractors and
Mhm.
fences, wire and feed and corn. It was
Yeah.
all organized by the Teamsters.
Mhm.
Yep.
Mhm.
And Farm Aid really helped a lot in that. You know, we haven't talked about
Coordinated the
Farm
whole
Aid.
thing.
Yeah, yeah,
I forgot about Farm Aid support over the years.
yeah.
Mm.
I think it's coming up on the 40th Farm Aid
Well,
concert.
85. Larry went by train to Illinois to that first one.
So that's, but I just feel like when we're gonna get to the end.
Yeah. Oh, Ben, you're talking to two old timers here, Anthony.
That's okay. Just like you have a lot of knowledge, a lot of experience.
Oh, but
We
we
need
want
to.
to take a rest.
We can always see the light, but we just can't.
Well, you're giving us motivation. You're giving us some inspiration for heading into this the next wave of protests. Oh, I'm saying like what's going on with protests like recently. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on in the current administration. Denise, you mentioned the hands-off protests. What's happening in your areas?
Well, I'll tell you, one of the big organizers in our area has been Indivisible. There are a lot of people are feeling more comfortable being associated with a nonpartisan organization, although it's all Democrats pretty much. But anyway, we're having we're having town halls where our legislators aren't showing up and talking to their cardboard figure. Some counties have put together puppets of our and we have a full delegation that's backing Trump, so it's really difficult and to get anywhere, and none of them are holding town halls. So except for Grassley, you have to give him credit for that, but he's way off the deep end now, and so people are doing a lot of work under the Indivisible.
Mm.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in the case of the Federation of Southern Cooperative, it's kind of, we are kind of in a predicament because I think we have over 15 different type of contracts with USDA.
Mm.
So you can't. So we've been having several strategy meetings in each state as what can we do, and
Yeah.
many of them, our leaders going to Atlanta next week to come up with what's the plan of action. We really don't know at this point. I do know yesterday they had a protest in Baton Rouge, uh, small farmers day at the State House in Baton Rouge. So they had all small farmers, Native American, white, black, they all converged on the state, and they were being hosted by one or two members in the House of Representatives in the Senate. So that yesterday was the day of the family farmer in the state of Louisiana. So I guess those things we have to begin at the State House and then move on. Maybe we have to do like we did with the 52,000 tractor, not necessarily with the tractor. There's 100,000 people come to Washington, D.C. in a major protest about what's going on. But the biggest thing I know the Federation is doing is strategizing. And, you could write letters and send to your senators and representatives. Most times you write a letter, they don't answer. But if you get on X, one of those other sites, they send you a note back quick. So I guess one of the main thing we I do know on the 15th, 16th of May here in the Mississippi, they calling us all the Jackson members and cooperative representatives for a 2-day strategizing meeting, 15, 16 of May. I think nobody really don't know what's the game plan. We got, when I say we organization like Family Farm Defenders and National and Rural Coalition, the Federation, many, many more, have to come up with one plan.
And it's hard. I think it's really difficult because every day things change, and so that's the confusion, and that is, I think so many things are going to pop up organically. And I hadn't heard about Baton Rouge, but Maine had theirs. So and as people as this continues, which inevitably it will, people maybe will be able to wrap their heads around it and strategize. But I really see from the 80s when, things were whispered and you couldn't talk about it, and there was fear in that, where it came out, and it was that American Ag Movement tractorcade across the country. It was things like that. And I think it's a lot of us older people who have been through that, who were through the civil rights movement, through the Vietnam thing, that our children don't have those experiences. You, Anthony, are younger, and I don't know how much younger than we are, but there's so much of that stuff that we grew up with in the 60s and 70s that has been, pretty absent. And so it's like, I think people are floundering in a lot of ways and looking for leadership and guidance, and it's very confusing because things happen so quickly every day. Yesterday the tariffs were on, the stock market went down. Now today it went up. It's really not that we're all involved with the stock markets, but just hearing all of that stuff around us. And we lived in a time when we didn't have Fox News. We didn't have Rush Limbaugh. He came in the 90s, and I think that has made a major difference.
Maybe that's something we could, I wonder, you've kind of touched on a lot of stuff, but maybe wrapping this up, if you could, what would be some lessons for the people who are the younger people who are who are confused, but also angry, maybe feeling hopeless? What would you say to some of the younger folks who are wanting to do something, either in egg spaces or non-egg spaces?
I would say just don't give up when things look like it can't be solved, it can't be worked out, but it can. And just keep on keeping on, and unity.
Yeah.
Where you really it's more important now than it was 35, 40 years ago, because since COVID, we tend to communicate virtual, as they say.
Yeah.
But say at some point, somebody need to coalesce that into one movement, and I don't know how to do it. Using the internet.
And it's, the people's, I think, the advice is, work locally and build trust. I think building trust is just, we've had this, this knife just split us down the middle. And I think by your actions in your community, and, working at food banks, doing the things, the getting food locally, doing volunteer time, although I'm stretched to the limit. We all are, and I can't move as quickly as I did before. I'm finding that out. Are you, Ben? So I think it's building trust and working locally, to be able to, and I think to have, one of the things that we're doing is trying to have conversations that will bring us together. We need to, I'm talking with our library about having a program on the Constitution. We need to
Mm.
understand the Constitution, and there's things that we, that I think we can learn from the elders for sure. People can learn from us and call on us to help. It's just like the action today, cleaning up the creek in Red Oak, Iowa. It's like we're not participating, but we want to be cheerleaders and we want to help. We want to help with it, and I think that's the thing, is that you reach out, and I still think it's the churches. Although there's a big split in the churches, but the mainstream churches are, I think, places, but there's a lot of fear, and overcoming that fear, I think, is a big hurdle.
I agree with you. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you for taking the time, talking about your experiences, the past, sharing some knowledge with us about the past of farm protests and the alliances and the connections you've built. And I imagine we'll see you on the front lines at some point again. I imagine we'll see where we end up.
Thank you all. Good to see you.
All right.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah, it's been a pleasure, and we just all have to keep together and move on. Like Ben said, unity. We just got to have that, overcome that.